All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening. Tonight's meeting is about the Mathis Avenue Improvements Project. This presentation will be recorded and posted to the project website at a later date. Before we get started, I'd like to go over some logistics for tonight's meeting. We will be giving our entire project presentation first, which will then be followed by a question and answer portion at the end. There is a Q&A box for you to type in your questions, so please feel free to enter your questions there throughout the meeting and we will address at the end. If you prefer to ask your question verbally, please use the raise hand function and I will call on you and unmute you when we get to your question. If you are joining us by phone tonight, please press *9 to raise your hand. And with that, thanks again, everyone, for joining, and I will hand it over to Mr. Keenan with the City of Manassas.
Great, thanks, Jessica. I'm John Keenan. I'm a senior engineer with the city and the project manager for this project. And thank you all for attending the meeting tonight. Just wanted to let everybody know, kind of set the stage for this meeting. We're pretty early in the design process, so our goal here with this meeting is to provide some general information on where the project is, on the project history and how we got here, and to outline some standard design features that we're looking at for this project, and get everybody a good feel for what the city is planning or what the city's vision is for this corridor. And so we'll, like Jessica said, we'll take questions throughout in the chat box or at the end verbally. We may not be able to provide verbal responses at this point to specific property questions through the corridor because of the high level nature of this meeting. But if you have those questions, go ahead and put them in the chat box and we can provide written answers following the meeting. Jessica, thank you. So the agenda for tonight, like I mentioned, we're going to go through the project background, the goals for the project, and then Cody Smith with our design engineer will go through the proposed design elements, the funding and schedule for the project, and then we'll move into the public comment feedback phase where we can hear from everyone here. So to get started with the project background, the corridor is on Mathis Avenue, as could be expected from the topic of the meeting, and it extends from Sudley Road in the south to Liberia Avenue in the north. And the extents include sidewalk and curb ramp improvements at those two intersections of the north and south end of the project. The corridor right now is mostly commercial with a series of large shopping centers, car and truck dealerships, and repair facilities, and numerous other businesses, restaurants, convenience stores, a whole host of others. So a little history on the development of the project. So it started back in 2006 when the Mathis corridor, or the Mathis sector plan was developed, and it called for a future mixed-use development within the corridor, and then streetscape improvements to address bicycle and pedestrian mobility in the corridor within the roadway right-of-way. Fast forward a little bit to 2014, 2015, the Mathis corridor enhancements were included in the city's strategic plan because the corridor is a gateway to the city. And then in 2016, the city was awarded a grant from the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments to develop streetscape standards for the Mathis corridor. In 2017, these were finalized, and those standards are now the basis for the sidewalk, the buffer, the median design, the other design elements that you'll see as part of this project. So in 2018, the Mathis corridor streetscape standards were incorporated into the city's design and construction standards manual as a letter to industry, or an LTI. And the city also first established a streetscape fund in the capital improvement program. 2019 is when the city's transportation master plan was completed, the first one that the city's had, which established street typologies citywide, including the Mathis corridor, and the Mathis Avenue in that plan is designated as an urban street. The Mathis Avenue Improvement Project, what we're really discussing here at this meeting, was established in the capital improvement program in fiscal year 20. And then 2019 is also when the 10% concept design was also developed. So in 2020, the city's 2040 comprehensive plan, including the transportation master plan, was adopted by city council. And then within the last year, the engineering design has advanced to about the 30% level. And that's what brings us here to this public outreach now that we've established some better cost estimates and a more established scope for the project. So to move forward into project goals, the first goal for the project is to improve pedestrian safety and connectivity through the Mathis Avenue corridor. So the city has two historic districts, one obviously in Old Town, and the second is around the Liberia House. And the Mathis corridor connects these two districts, and the comp plan really seeks to provide a safe pedestrian link between these two districts. The second goal is to provide or to improve vehicle safety within the corridor. And this will be done through dedicated turn lanes, which will create more predictable traffic patterns and vehicle movements as opposed to today's two-way left turn lane that extends throughout the corridor. The comprehensive plan also seeks to establish a distinct character for the Mathis corridor by creating a sense of place and making it an area that residents will want to be. And finally, the Mathis corridor was designated an opportunity zone under the Federal Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2017. So ultimately, the city hopes that improving the multimodal connectivity in the corridor will promote future investment. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Cody Smith, who is the project manager for our engineering consultant, and he will cover some of the design features that are proposed.
Thank you, John. And what I'd like to do, kind of before I jump into the proposed design, I want to take just a couple of minutes to just refresh those who may not be completely familiar with this corridor, kind of the existing conditions that are out there today. And as many of you are aware, today Mathis Avenue is comprised of a single travel way in either direction with a bidirectional left turn lane in the middle of the road. 4-foot sidewalks are located on either side of the road, and in many locations, parking lots serving the businesses along Mathis Avenue are paved right up to the back edge of the existing sidewalks. With the exception of some of the landscaping improvements that have been made on the west side of Mathis Avenue by Manassas Shopping Center, as well as the Reb Yank Shopping Center, there are very few trees and plantings along this corridor. Next slide, please. So to address these issues while addressing those project goals that John mentioned earlier, our team has gone ahead and prepared the conceptual design and 30% design that I'll be walking you through this evening. As an aside, the trees actually reflected on this slide are just a couple of the tree species proposed to be planted along this corridor as part of the project. Next slide, please. On the screen now, you'll see the proposed cross-section of Mathis Avenue once improvements are constructed. The most notable change is the replacement of that middle bidirectional left turn lane with a planted median. Sidewalks are proposed to be widened and reconstructed from their current 4-foot width to a 6-foot wide sidewalk and shifted further back from the edge of the road. Planted buffers are also proposed along the back of the sidewalks to provide a green space between some of those parking lots and the sidewalks that I mentioned earlier. Additionally, new decorative streetlights are proposed along this entire project section. It is important to note that this project does not propose to widen Mathis Avenue. The curb and gutter along either side of the road today will not be moved as part of this project. Next slide, please. So the next 3 slides provide a more detailed look at Mathis Avenue once improvements are made. To orient, I'm going to be describing the improvements to Mathis from south to north, starting at Sudley Road, which you'll see at the left side of this graphic, and ultimately ending up at Liberia Avenue. On this graphic, generally north is to the right, west is up, east is down, south is to the left. This sheet specifically shows Mathis Avenue starting again at Sudley Road and coming just short of Carriage Lane. And starting at the intersection of Mathis and Sudley, we do propose brick stamped asphalt crosswalks to match the historic feel of Old Town and really take that feel north towards the Liberia House. Moving north along this stretch of Mathis shown here, improvements are generally focused on the east side of Mathis Avenue. We endeavor to maintain the streetscape improvements that have already been made by Manassas Shopping Center on the west side, as I previously mentioned. We propose to reconstruct entrances to all of the businesses on the east side of Mathis Avenue while creating that buffer between the sidewalk and parking lots that I mentioned earlier. We'll also create that raised landscape median I previously mentioned, while creating breaks in that median to allow for left turns into and out of the business entrances on both sides of the road. Next slide, please. This slide shows Mathis Avenue continuing from Carriage Lane, again to your left, to just short of Reb Yank Drive. As with the intersection of Sudley and Mathis, we propose brick stamped crosswalks at the intersection of Carriage Lane and Mathis Avenue. And as with the previous slide, improvements are generally concentrated on the east side and the median of Mathis Avenue. At the middle of the page, we do propose to relocate one of the entrances into the Manassas Shopping Center to line up with the entrance to the small strip retail center on the east side of the road. As we pass north of Manassas Shopping Center at the right side of the page, you'll note that we do start to pick up sidewalk and landscape improvements in front of the Battlefield Ford there on the west side of the road. Next slide, please. This slide shows the final portion of Mathis Avenue between Reb Yank Drive and Liberia Avenue. And again, as with the previous intersections, we again propose that brick stamp crosswalk at the intersection of Reb Yank and Mathis. And again, we also concentrate our improvements to the median and the east side of Mathis, again, taking advantage of those street frontage improvements that have been previously made by the Reb Yank Center. This project ultimately ends on the north at its northern terminus there on the right side of the page with Liberia Avenue, keeping the same lane configuration at the intersection of Mathis as is currently at the intersection today. Next slide, please. So this slide really just shows a lot of the elements, the design elements that are incorporated into the overall project. At the left of the sheet, you'll note some of the species of trees that are proposed to be planted along Mathis Avenue. I'd point out that these trees, we've endeavored to utilize native species for a good deal of the planting that is going to be proposed along Mathis. At the top middle of this graphic, you'll note the stamped concrete or stamped asphalt brick pavers that many of you, I'm sure, have seen throughout Old Town Manassas. And again, this is in an effort to extend that feel and that look from Old Town up to Liberia House. The top right is an example or a detail showing what those decorative street lights would look like along the roadway. And then in the bottom right, many of you would be familiar with this road. That's Grant Avenue there, just north of Old Town Manassas. And we wanted to show this graphic primarily for the median that's there in the middle of Grant Avenue. Ultimately, the goal is that once some of the plantings mature along Mathis Avenue, that the look and feel of that road will start to become something akin to what you see along Grant Avenue, albeit with businesses in lieu of homes. Next slide, please. So I want to talk just a little bit about funding and schedule. This project is, as previously mentioned, has been partially funded by the city as part of its FY 2021 capital improvements program. Total project cost right now is estimated to be $7.3 million. As John mentioned, and I will expound upon slightly here, federal funds are being sought by the city to supplement the city's budgeted contribution. Those federal funds come in the form of what's known as a build grant application that was submitted to federal highways back in May of 2020. Next slide, please. With respect to the project schedule, I would note that this schedule is certainly dependent on receipt of appropriate project funding, but assuming funding to be in place, we generally are looking to collect and respond to public feedback over the next 3 months. Following that public feedback process, we would look to take roughly a year to develop the final design plans for this project, with one additional year being required to acquire any right-of-way or easements that might be necessary to allow construction of the project. And finally, we're estimating that construction of this project would take approximately 1 year as well. Next slide, please. With that, that really concludes the formal presentation of the project. We really appreciate the time that everyone has taken to view this and listen to this presentation. And I'm going to turn things over to Jessica to administer any questions that may have come up during our presentation. Thank you.
Sure. So with that, we're opening our time now for Q&A. You can type in your questions in the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. And if you would like to ask your question verbally, please just raise your hand and I can allow you to talk. So we don't have any questions in our Q&A box just yet, but we did have a question, a raised hand from Miss Martha Wilson. Martha, could you unmute?
Thank you. I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. What a wonderful presentation. I just had a question about, from one of the pictures that I saw, and the electric power lines were still being shown along the road, and wondering if wouldn't this be a perfect time to go ahead and bury those electric lines while you're doing everything else? Oh, am I supposed to type?
No, you're fine.
Oh, okay. Hi, Cody.
Cody, would you like this one, or would you like me to take it?
Sure, I take first pass, John. If you want to, if you want to fill in anything I missed on the back end. Yeah, and Ms. Wilson, it's a very good question. There is always a great desire to relocate utilities underground wherever opportunity provides. In this instance, that being said, the relocation of utilities underground is a very expensive endeavor. As you've probably heard in the news over time, particularly in Washington, D.C., or after every major storm, there's always a major push to look at undergrounding utilities. In this instance, in order to underground those utilities, that would be a direct cost that the city would have to undertake in order to accomplish that. And the cost associated with that is likely to be of such a magnitude as not to be achievable within a reasonable project budget. Now, that being said, I think we continuously look at opportunities where those utilities might be able to be placed underground. I can tell you specifically that there are a number of pad-mounted transformers and such that are along this roadway that we are looking at providing specific landscaping to somewhat hide those transformers and such. So we do take that very seriously, and we are looking at reasonable, cost-effective means to kind of pare back what you see out there. The other thing I would mention is that with the establishment of the trees that are going to be both along the median as well as in some cases along the in some of these buffer strips between the sidewalk and road and between the sidewalk and some of these parking lots, those trees really do a great job of kind of muting the look of those lines, right? They start to get lost in the trees, and that what is out there today and what sticks out as much as it does, that really starts to fade back a little bit once you are able to introduce trees along that corridor. So that's kind of what our thinking has been to this point. John, I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to add to that.
Sure. Yeah, just a couple things. That was a good explanation. But Ms. Wilson, also, so most of the city power is actually already underground in this corridor. The poles that are out there are mostly street lighting, and there are some private utilities. So I think that there are also some utilities in this corridor that are not owned by the city, and so we have less control over even having the ability to relocate them without the extensive cost that Cody was bringing up. Novec and some other folks external to the city own some of those utilities as well. So that was a very good question. I appreciate you asking it.
Thank you very much.
All right, next we have a raised hand from Jerry Taylor. Jerry, could you go ahead and unmute for us?
Can you hear me?
Yep, we got you.
I don't know why it says Jerry Taylor, but maybe it's because he got the invite. Jerry Taylor is the owner of Manassas Shopping Center and Liberia Development Corporation, which hosts Battlefield Ford. And I am the property manager for both those properties. So I guess that's why it says Jerry Taylor. I am Byron Marshall with Rappaport, the company. question I have is in regards to long-term maintenance. I think this presentation has been fabulous, and it's funny. I was just down there today because of a property management issue, and now having looked at your presentation, I said, "Oh, this is going to look great." But I've been down this road before in my line of work, and it looks great today. And I'm thinking about 5 years from now, 7 years from now, 10 years from now, in terms of long-term maintenance, and what that's going to, what's involved in that, and what the cost is involved, and how that's going to impact the properties. And I'm talking about from a financial standpoint. Can you guys talk about that a little bit?
Sure, I can take that question. So the improvements that we're proposing are totally within the right of way. And so unless there's something that comes up on a case by case basis, it would be the city's responsibility for maintenance, for landscape maintenance and for the planted median and things like that. And so I personally think the city does puts a lot of effort into maintaining the landscaping in streets across the city. And so I guess we could kind of let the evidence speak to it, to that point in the example that Cody brought up on Grant Avenue or other areas around the city too, where we have plantings in medians and buffers. But yeah, I appreciate the question that obviously a project like this is not helpful or doesn't have a long-term viability unless a commitment is made to maintain it well, and upkeep is done well throughout the tenure of, or throughout the length of the facility. So, Lance, did you have anything you wanted to add to that response?
Yeah, I just was going to comment that a lot of times in the beginning of the project, we want to make sure that the what is being installed and what is being constructed, establish itself and grows and things like that. So typically we would also have the contractor have some sort of warranty associated with it until such time as the landscaping starts to grow and things like that. But I do appreciate the question, and obviously it's in our best interest to maintain it as well as part of the city. Thank you.
All right, we have a typed question. Has a traffic study been done to determine the effects of reducing the road by 1 lane in each direction? And if so, what are the results?
I'm happy to take that one, John, if you'd like.
Go for it.
So the answer is number one, yes. A traffic study was, as part of our scope of work, a traffic study was conducted on this project, primarily to determine the impact of the removal of that center bidirectional left turn lane. I would highlight at the outset that we are not eliminating any through lanes as part of this project. So today there's 1 lane in either direction with essentially a continuous bidirectional left turn lane, and there'll be one lane in either direction at the conclusion of this project. So the goal here and the intended result of this project is to not reduce any really of the capacity of Mathis Avenue to carry the amount of traffic that it's carrying today. We did specifically look at turning movements. Obviously, if we eliminate that bidirectional left turn lane and we replace it with a raised median and median brakes, there is certainly a potential that left turning vehicles could back into that through lane. And we were tasked specifically to look at that issue and to determine what amount of backup might occur as a result of the installation of these medians. What I didn't highlight in the presentation, but what you can see in certain instances in these median brakes, is that the median brakes have been established at a width to allow at least one vehicle to queue in those median brakes to make their left turns, thereby keeping them out of through traffic. So the long of the short of it is, I suppose, that yes, a traffic study was done, and the results of that study show that what we're proposing here would not have a significantly negative impact on flow of traffic along this corridor.
All right. Next question we have from Chelsea. Her comment here is Mathis Avenue is a major thoroughfare for folks traveling between Liberia and Studley Road. Has a traffic study been conducted to see how eliminating the center turn lane will back up traffic from people turning into those businesses that line Mathis Avenue, which I believe you just answered, Cody.
Yes, and again, we appreciate that question, and it is one that, you know, it is an important issue, and as you know, obviously as established by the fact we've gotten multiple questions on it, and again, I would reiterate that the specific answer is yes, we did look at that, and that again, the median brakes are being established in a way in which to allow at least one vehicle to queue, and we did take specific vehicle counts and turning movement counts along Mathis Avenue to establish what those actual turning movements look like, to make sure that we are not in impeding the flow of traffic with what we're proposing.
All right, another one from Chelsea here. Will the driving lanes be wide enough for 2 cars to pass side by side? The graphic makes it appear as though the driving lanes will only be wide enough for 1 car to travel at a time. That may be an issue if a vehicle becomes disabled, as other vehicles won't be able to hop the curb along the side of the road or the median to pass by.
So that is a very good question, and the graphic is correct as shown. And it sounds like Chelsea's probably driven this road a number of times, and yes, it is true that today the through lanes are only wide enough for one vehicle in width. In other words, you cannot really one vehicle really can't pass another and stay in those through lanes. With the introduction of those medians, of the median in the middle of the road, there is a potential for that to occur. What I would note is that the location and the frequency of median breaks is fairly significant, and that we've done that to not only to allow for unimpeded access to the businesses that are currently along Mathis Avenue, but those median breaks also create areas where vehicles can pass one another in an emergency, or in an instance where a vehicle has completely broken down. I would note, for Chelsea, that while Mathis Avenue is a significant roadway that does carry a lot of traffic, there are parallel routes as well. In any instance, there's always a chance for a roadway to become impaired to a point that through traffic cannot, pass by because of a major accident or such. And obviously we have Portner Avenue directly to the west, and then Route 28 to the east that are also parallel roadways for traffic to utilize if for some reason Mathis were to become completely blocked.
All right, we have a raised hand from Uriah. Uriah, could you please come off mute and ask your question?
Yes, hello, Uriah Kaiser from Potomac Local News. I have 3 questions. The first is, you said that you have partial funding from the 21 CIP. Can you tell me how much funding was allocated to this project from the 21 CIP?
If you can go ahead and ask your second question, I will look up that number as you're asking it.
Okay. Secondly, what's the traffic count for this stretch of street, from Liberia, basically the project scope here? What's the daily average traffic count?
I don't have that number right at the tip of my fingers. I would suggest we can certainly provide you with that data, with a copy of the traffic study that was done, to get you that information.
Okay.
And you're right. I can answer. I can go ahead. I found the number to answer your first question. The CIP, the total CIP, is for $7.227 million for the project at this point, and that's broken down between city bond funds, federal funds, and funding from the NVTA, from Northern Virginia Transportation Association, or NVTA.
So you're at 7.2 is what you have in the 21 CIP is what you said?
Correct.
And then it's a $7.3 million project, so it's nearly funded. Is that correct?
So the bond funding is there. The federal funding is applied for, but we have not received it yet. So
and that would make up the you know what, $800,000 difference that you need.
Yeah, so correct. The federal funding that we've applied for would be the balance of the project, of the required funds for the construction of the project.
Okay, but overall, it's as you said, it's a $7.3 million project to complete.
Correct.
Okay. Do we have a timeline for construction start? I mean, or do we have a construction start date in mind?
We do not at this point, because it is funding. It's going to be driven by acquisition of the funding.
Okay, so you're waiting on that final piece of the federal funding before you can commit to a start date.
Correct.
And finally, you've described an area, and those of us who've driven through Manassas, I mean, Mathis Avenue, know this area. You know, it's as you described it. You know, it is shopping centers. A large part of those lots are unused. On the other side, you have auto repair. You know, so this it clearly isn't a destination at this point. You know, so what's I shouldn't. It's not like downtown Manassas. So where the Grant Avenue streetscape's going on. So why are we spending $7.3 million to improve the streetscape? What's the overall vision? I don't think we've heard much about the overall vision for this area. Is it going to remain as is, or is this project a catalyst to remake this entire corridor?
Yeah, that's a good question. And actually, before I answer that, I wanted to hop back just to the funding to clarify something in the funding. So it was the total federal funding that we've applied for is about $5.55 million. That was the balance, just to round out that previous response. And so to answer your third question, the hope is that this project would be a catalyst for the corridor, that the city it wants to invest in it as a pedestrian linkage, we mentioned earlier in the presentation, to create a sense of place here, and in hopes that it would encourage others to invest in it in the future.
And are we talking, and I don't mean to hog time, but what type of redevelopment are we envisioning for this corridor, so we can paint a picture for, you know, people who are asking the question, well, why are we doing this?
That's a question that I don't have the answer to at the moment. If any of the other panelists do, feel free to speak up. But that's unfortunately not a question I can answer.
John, I would add one thing to kind of help answer that question,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's really, I would refer you to the city's comprehensive plan and the sector plan for this area, right? There is a vision that's been established in the comprehensive plan for redevelopment, and that comp plan does show a mixture of residential, retail development, really kind of a mixed use development within this project area. Understanding that, you know, redevelopment is obviously a market-driven issue, right? I mean, we as the city and as the engineer, we are certainly not in a position to necessarily drive redevelopment. What we can do, and I think what we're attempting to do here, is one, take a first step towards that as John said, in starting that placemaking, and again, doing that within the framework of the comprehensive plan that's been established for this area. But just as importantly, you know, this is not simply an economic redevelopment try. This is also very, you know, there are some very important safety issues that are being addressed as part of this project. And I would note that, you know, the creation of this landscape median helps create kind of buffering between vehicles. The reconstruction of the sidewalk and creating the extra space between the sidewalk and the road, as well as the sidewalk and some of the existing retail parking, will significantly increase pedestrian safety along this corridor. The high visibility crosswalks, the new handicap ramps that will be installed as part of this also will allow for many of these crossings to become ADA compliant, and they aren't necessarily so today, given the age of some of the infrastructure. So, I think without speaking too far into it, I think those are probably two of the, the major points that are trying to be made with this project. One is again a catalyst for redevelopment and a placemaking, again in conformance with the comp plan. But two, and every bit as important, is the safety improvements that are being proposed as part of the project.
And that updated federal number, the 5 million that you in funds that you applied for, that brings added that to the 7.2. That's 12.2 million. Is that the actual cost of this project?
No, so the total cost is the $7.2 million. The 5.5 is the portion of that we have applied for to be funded through the federal funds.
So in essence, the city would be reimbursed with a part of that from the federal. I guess the city could be with the federal money. If the city's putting up the majority right now, if the federal funds come in, that would go to reimburse the city.
Correct, and the intention is not to move to the construction phase prior to finalizing any sort of funding agreement there.
Thank you very much.
I just had a few things to add to that also, just for clarity. The actual dollars that we have on hand currently is about 500,000. The additional money in bonds and other items are going to be moved shortly. But we're looking at the build grant. And the build grant, we hope to hear back this fall on the additional funding. So if we get that additional funding, then we would be in good shape. The other thing I did want to add is that in conformance with the comp plan, as Cody mentioned, the project is intended to spur redevelopment as envisioned by the comp plan. And in addition to that, the traffic evaluation that was done for this corridor took into account future development in this corridor as well. So it wasn't just based on existing conditions, it was based on future development so that it would work in the future as well as it works today, or will work today when the project is completed. Thank you.
All right, moving on. Just a note, if you do have any questions that you're typing, please type them into the Q&A box and not the chat. Next, we have a question here from Royce Miller. Royce, could you go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hello. Yes, I own the property there on 28 and Liberia and Mathis on the corner of the car lot and the auto care there. And I've owned that property since 1986. Wasn't that long ago, I guess, 12, 15 years ago, where you widened Mathis and widened Liberia and had a dedication of property along that, which we have a very, very tight lot there as it is. How much property are you looking to need off of Mathis, and are you looking for anything off of Liberia?
I can answer that question. So to the second half of it first, anything off of Liberia, the answer would be only if there was a need to tie in a sidewalk or configure around a signal at the intersection. The intention is not for widening improvements along Liberia. And the needs for right-of-way or other dedication through the rest of the corridor are really going to be variable. And you can kind of see from the rendering that we have put together, the sidewalk is going to meander a little bit, and we really made an effort to minimize the amount of right-of-way or other easements that we would need by keeping existing transformers and different obstructions and things in place. So on a case by case basis, we can answer that question following the meeting. I don't know exactly at each parcel, the number of feet or anything like that we would need. But I can tell you that we did make an effort to minimize it to the extent practicable. Because if Jessica, actually, if you can go back to the typical proposed section slide. Just for some reference through the corridor, the curb line at the edges of the roadway are not moving. Like I think Cody mentioned that earlier in the presentation. The roadway width is staying the same. And so the only changes in terms of right of way or easements or other impacts on property are going to be behind the curb with the variable width buffer zone and the wider sidewalk. And then configurations to tying and grading and whatnot behind that. So I think that's as specific I think as I can be at the moment in terms of looking at the project corridor as a whole. And then we'd have to look case by case, at your property to give you a more specific answer.
Well, I mean, I know on our property, the sidewalk is, and there's very hardly any land between the edge of the sidewalk and the curb on the road. So, and my property goes right up to I mean, we park cars right up to the sidewalk. So if you're talking about adding a buffer on both sides of the sidewalk and widening the sidewalk, you're talking, according to your graphic here, 2 foot, 6 foot, 2.5, 8, 10 feet, and there's probably 4 foot there. So you're probably talking 6 to 7 feet of encroachment. Am I kind of calculating that right?
Yes, and I mean in the case of your property there on the corner, I am, if the sidewalk is, I mean the math you just did would be correct. If the sidewalk is up against the back of the existing curb, that we would be looking at, obviously the 8 feet you just added up there, the 10 feet you just added up there, minus the width of the existing sidewalk. Cody, would you like to add to that?
4 foot wide now, probably 4 foot, I would imagine.
Yeah, and Mr. Miller, I'm actually looking at. I'm familiar with your property there at the corner. I know which one you're talking about. As John mentioned, while what you're looking at there is a typical section, we are making every effort to minimize the impacts to businesses. Right, the city is certainly sensitive to the businesses along this corridor, and the intent here is not to create any harm to those businesses. As a background, I would offer this to anybody who's on the call who owns property along this corridor. We are certainly happy and willing to hold independent or separate meetings on site with any property owner who has specific concerns about their property. And Mr. Miller, I specifically offer that invitation to you as well. That is certainly something that we would be happy to do, to come out, kind of take a look based on what the plans reflect now, and really just be able to talk through what those impacts might be and how some of those impacts might be mitigated. Right. This is really the purpose of why we're here tonight. Right. Is to give everybody a first good look at what we're proposing and to start that conversation. We want this to be a win for everybody, and we want everybody to get to feel like they're getting something out of this project. So again, to that end, if through the chat, or if you want to send an email through the city's website or the project website, we would be more than happy to come out and meet with you.
Well, definitely, we'll take you up on that. I mean, 6 to 8 foot doesn't sound like a whole lot, but when you've already taken 12 foot or 14, I can't remember what the last bite was. It really starts to degrade our business opportunities there with space. It's already a tight lot. a lot going on that corner. And so that's my concern. And I'd be happy to, sit down and meet with you. Can you tell me at this point, I know that we only have one entrance to the car lot there. And it's pretty close to the corner. Is there going to be an opening to make a left-hand turn off of Mathis into our entrance?
Jessica, could you go to slide 13, please? So you can see by this graphic kind of the setup for the project and what the current proposal looks like as far as entrances. Your entrance, sir, you said you have your one entrance there off of Mathis, correct?
Correct.
Right. So you can see, given the current proposal right now, you would the lefts in or out of that entrance would be restricted by the median, given the proximity to the traffic signal. Again, though, and I don't want to take up too much time on with everybody on the call, but again, I think this is a scenario where a specific on-site discussion about your property is definitely warranted, and certainly something that we'll follow up with you on.
All right, sounds fair.
All right, moving on. We have another question in here from Byron Marshall. He said he forgot to ask for the detail in which during your presentation it was mentioned that the access through the Manassas Shopping Center will be involved. If possible, as the property manager, can I get specific details of what's involved?
Certainly, and I would kind of echo what I just said, Mr. Marshall. If you would be so kind as to possibly put in a request through the city's website. And John, I see you nodding, so I think I'm not going astray. We would be more than happy to come out at your convenience whenever you happen to be on the site. We can schedule a time where we can kind of walk through some of the more detailed issues with respect to that property.
All right. And Byron, I saw your other question in here about getting a copy of the presentation. We are recording this presentation and it will be posted to the project website. All right, next question. Are there any zoning change plans for residential or commercial use in the vicinity?
I can take that one, Jessica. That the zoning actually has the zoning ordinance was actually already updated, I believe, with the comprehensive plan update that and those changes were made. So those changes were made in 2020 through around this corridor, and it affects setbacks and or required setbacks and other items that are looked at by community development.
All right, next question. Are there any?
Sorry, Jessica, I just wanted to add on to that. Currently, there are no proposed rezonings or redevelopment at this time in that corridor that we have seen. So I just wanted to throw that out to you. The other thing I did want to mention is that we do have an upcoming in-person meeting, which I believe is upcoming as well, that we can also meet with you and look at the actual plan to talk specific about your property as well. And what we have done in the past for others is actually met out there and actually, essentially painted what impacts you're going to have across your property, which is helpful when you're actually sitting there and looking at it. So just wanted to throw that out to you.
All right, next question. Are there any discussions regarding bike lanes in this corridor?
Yeah, I can take that question too. Thanks for the question. That there have been discussions about bike lanes in the corridor. It's something that we looked at actually in a lot of detail, and the constraints of this project were basically to maintain the existing curb lines for budgetary reasons. And so we were not able to incorporate bike lanes into this project. But also the city's comprehensive plan and the bike plan show the bike route through this area of the city as actually being Portner Avenue. And so that's another reason why bike lanes were not incorporated into this project at this time.
All right. Can you all please speak to any drainage or stormwater management issues that may occur with the new plantings in the median?
I can take that one. So it's a good question, and there's kind of a good news story here. Two things I would note at the outset. One, as we previously mentioned, the curb lines along Mathis here are not being proposed to be moved, and because of that, the storm drain system is not being proposed to be impacted really significantly at all as part of this project. So the storm drain system, and some of you may know who've been around for a while, there was a significant storm drain upgrade made along Mathis. I want to say something on the order of 25 years ago or so, and to address flooding. So again, our intent is not to change that system or have to modify that system really as it sits today. The even better part of this is with the transition of that middle bidirectional left turn lane from asphalt to grass, that is actually a direct benefit to stormwater management. Any area in which we can take impervious area out, i.e. pavement, and replace that with grass, that is a direct improvement to both stormwater quality, the water, the pollutants that are in the water, as well as the amount of stormwater that runs off of this road. So this project ultimately should result in a net benefit from a stormwater quality and quantity perspective.
Great. Next question. The city has the draft changes to the DCSM out for comment. Changes integrate with the 2040 comp plan. Will this project comply with the section 9-300 complete street design, as the DCSM changes will be approved before the first shovel is turned?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very good question. Thanks for asking that. And the answer is yes to the extent practical or practicable. That was a good catch. Yeah, those, I think they were just published this week for public comment. And we did have those in mind as we were developing the concepts for this project. I guess one caveat, the biggest caveat there being that the bike lane issue that we just discussed and the urban street designation typology in the complete streets section of the DCSM would ask for a bike lane, and we don't have the funding or the width to do that here in this corridor.
All right, it looks like that is the rest of the questions that we have in the Q&A box. Are there any others from the public?
I do see the comment question in the box from Councilwoman Forkel Green that just reiterating that March 17th is the in-person meeting. It will be held at the Prince William Islamic Center there on Mathis Avenue at 5 p.m.
Yeah, those details are over here as well on the screen.
I think someone else had mentioned or asked about whether or not they could get a copy of the presentation. I don't know if you wanted to address that, be posted to the website, etc.
The presentation will be posted to the website at a later date.
Mm-hmm.
Another question that we just got, how much will it raise our taxes?
I can take that one. That this has no direct tie to the tax rate that council will be reviewing for the fiscal year. But that being said, all city council's budgetary considerations or budgetary hearings are going to be open for comment, and they'll be looking at the city budget holistically. This project being part of the holistic city budget. So I think that's.
I would just add too that since the majority of the project is federally funded or would be federally funded in NVTA funds and et cetera, we do not see a major impact at this point. Only other thing I would add too, while you were asking about the DCSM, is the hope is that the DCSM would be adopted in May, is the intent.
Well, I guess with that, we don't see any other questions in the chat box. And we really appreciate everybody's time, the time everybody spent with us this evening to discuss the project. We hope this was informative. We really appreciate the feedback that we got. Know that it will be noted as we progress with the design. And if you have any other thoughts or comments, feel free to visit the project website, which you can get to either through the community development website at the city, or through the link here on the page, tinyurl.com/Mathis Avenue. And you can submit a comment or a question there. And we will definitely be reviewing everything that is submitted. And we very much appreciate everybody's time. We'll be submitting we will be uploading the recording and the presentation to the website when we're all done. So thank you, everybody. Have a good night.